Charmaine, thank you so much for being here. We met about a little over a month ago, and you were on your
Yes,
way to South Africa.
yes.
How was your really quickly? We were talking about this before we hit record, but how was your trip to South Africa? We talked a little bit of highlights, but I like to hear. I like
Yeah,
everybody
it
else to
was it
hear it.
was amazing. It was amazing. They're in the southern hemisphere, so it was their summer, so it was a very welcome break from the New York winter to have some heat
Sure.
and not have to have a winter coat and to be able to enjoy walking around and not being freezing. I loved it. It was great.
That's that's a great feeling. And
Yes.
one thing that you were highlighting too is the vibrancy
Mm-hmm.
of South Africa and how there's so much industry and there's so much opportunity there.
Yeah. There's so much opportunity there from a business development standpoint. I think that they're really, really wanting to, and they have been,
Mhm.
at the forefront of development and business for such a long time. I have a really good friend who is a fashion designer, and he just
Oh.
came back from there a few months ago, and he's done
Mhm.
their Cape Town Fashion Week, he's done their Johannesburg Fashion Week and display. But the biggest thing he told me a few months ago was, hey, there's a lot of business development opportunity here. It's not just about, even for him in the fashion spaces, what's the business strategy and how do we actually develop this country and have better partnerships around the world. So I love that.
I love it. There's so much opportunity out there. Like
Yeah, so
if you
much.
truly look for it, there's so much opportunity and so much positive
Mm,
opportunity too. There's not
yeah.
just quick profit opportunity. There's a lot of opportunity to
Yeah.
make a difference, and make an impact in a lot of people's lives,
Yeah.
a lot of communities' lives. So that's amazing. I'm really cool that we got to talk a little bit about that. I was very
Yeah. Me too.
interested in that. I was really curious in how that trip for you went. But again, we'll save that for another podcast. We'll talk about South Africa
Sure.
there. But
Sure. We could do
for
that.
right now, I'm going to make this the first question. I'm going to make it pretty easy on you. It should be
Mhm.
something that you are a expert in, which is yourself. So tell
Yeah.
everybody a little bit about yourself, what you do, and kind of some of your passions.
All right. The first thing I like to tell everyone is that I am an auntie to an amazing 3-year-old who keeps me on my toes. And even on LinkedIn, every Wednesday I do a post dedicated to something I've learned from him. So follow me and check that out on LinkedIn.
That's cute.
Other than that, I am a sister, a friend, all the things that make us human and intersectional in the way that we present. I was born and raised in Barbados, immigrated to the US, and then built my career in HR after going to school for computer science. That's another podcast for another day.
Oh, I was going to say that was a left
So
turn. All right.
yeah, but you know what? We're going to weave that into the conversation at some point today.
Yep.
And then, ultimately founded Chapter 2 LLC, which is a people first organizational and leadership development consultancy. And really, the passion around that came from recognizing, as I came up in HR, and I have an identical twin sister, and her and I would talk, and we realized that a lot of the business strategies are devoid of consideration of people, and they're therefore not leading to the outcomes that they want in workplaces, right? And I came up in the in the private sector, and she came up in the public sector. So we were seeing and experiencing the same thing regardless of the sector. So that really was what started Chapter 2.
I love that. So I have a question. This is
Yeah,
going to be easier, I think,
cool.
to answer. But for you, what would you hope that people listening to this or watching this are going to get out of this? What would you hope that they learn?
Embrace a pivot, right? And I think that was a good tee up from what we were talking about before, moving from computer science into HR, right? A lot of times in life, we think that we're stuck doing one thing, especially within our careers. And I can tell you, there's nothing that you can tell me experience wise that you've had that I can't relate to how it benefits what you're doing today.
Why do you think that is? Why do you think people are, uh, scared, or I don't know if it's fear or maybe too comfortable even
Mm.
to pivot? Why do you think that is? Why do you think it's so difficult for them to pivot?
Well, there's so much here, right? We think about it from a historical standpoint, we think about it from a cultural standpoint, it all depends, right? So how you were raised, what you've been exposed to, what you've been experienced. Did you come up or grow up in a community or in a family that told you when you get a job, you keep that job, you don't switch, you don't take the risk, you just need to make sure you're getting a steady paycheck. The other thing is that we are all as limited as the experiences we've had, and that includes the people we surround ourselves with. So if you are a big dreamer and you have this vision to do all of the things that are amazing to you, and no one around you holds that vision or can see that, it's very easy for them to try to dampen that down. And it's not because they
Mm,
don't have good intention. And this is one of the things we have to recognize. It's because they don't have the capacity to hold the vision that you're describing. They've never seen it. And it's always crazy until it happens, right? And if they haven't experienced it, they don't have a framework to support you through it.
That's powerful. And it's so relatable, I think, because I mean, a lot of people listen to this. They want to achieve, and business owners,
Yeah.
that's entrepreneurs, which you are very
Yeah.
much so one of those.
Yeah.
That's where we live, is in that dream, is in
Yeah.
that the possibilities of what we could create.
Hmm.
With when you're working with a lot of these when you're doing your leadership development, you're doing this personal development. What would you say is some of the top roadblocks that people face when they do try to achieve these things? Is it more external, or do you believe it leans more internal?
The loudest voice is always in our head, right? Now, whether that voice is influenced by what people are saying around us, a lot of that is there, but it's definitely the
Mm,
loudest voice is always going to be in our head. Do you believe in what you can do? If you also haven't seen it happen before, are you putting roadblocks in your path? Sometimes we are our own blockers, and we have to acknowledge that as well. So I also tell people, whether I've worked with CEOs, business leaders, mid management, entry level career, we all as humans face the same things. We have doubts, we're afraid. What I've found is that the more senior we get, the bigger those titles get within corporations, people are less willing to say that because they believe I
mm,
should know, or somebody's looking at me and decided that I do know. And therefore, that internalization of that anxiety or
mm,
that discomfort is what's happening versus being willing to say, hey, I need some help or I
mm-hmm.
don't know. So I've definitely found that to be a challenge the more senior people are. I'm not saying everyone, it's just a lot of the executives that I have coached throughout my life, or even now with chapter two, it's definitely this I can't say I don't know.
So there's something that we say a lot, or one of our, um, I guess, concepts that we
Hmm.
really try to hit on when we're doing workshops, and it's that one of the biggest enemies to success is success itself.
Hmm.
So how when somebody who's in that position, whether they're a business owner, CEO, C-suite executive, they've seen some success,
Hmm.
right? So they think, I'm going to keep doing the same inputs to get a different
Hmm.
output.
Hmm.
Where can they start? Because obviously they know that they're not where they want to be.
Hmm.
They
Hmm.
just can't. That they feel, whether it's the fear or the external, people are that they're relying on you, and you don't want to
Hmm.
admit that you don't know, and then
Hmm.
that's seen as a sign of weakness.
Hmm.
Where should they start? Where
Yeah.
should they start to make those improvements?
So I have two responses for this. One is how you lead as a leader is going to really impact the way you are even led, right? Because leadership starts with self, right? And if I always tell a leader, if that's the way you feel, who else might feel that way? So if I start a meeting with someone, or I'm in the space, even when I was, head in HR in corporate America, I never assumed that everyone knew what I was talking about. I might start it off with, to a reminder for the people who already know and an introduction to those who don't. But by setting that leveling right there at the front, it meant that someone who may not raise their hand had the information. So I was working to ensure that everyone was starting on the same at the same place with whatever is about to share or get presented. And I tell leaders that's important to do, because if you start doing that and you're modeling that, people around you will start to do the same, which means that some of that anxiety that you may have around, I don't want to say anything I don't know, someone is already trained because that's what they're experiencing to start off that way. So it's a way to kind of balance that, right? The other
Go
thing
ahead.
is put yourself in other spaces. We are as limited as what we experience and what's around us. So get yourself up physically, put yourself in a different environment. Go hang out with people you wouldn't necessarily hang out with. Join a book club, join whatever it is. There's so many, forums online. Join something, yes, there's in person. Challenge yourself. If you are only around a certain demographic of people, get over yourself and go get yourself with another demographic of people. We live in a global world, and our awareness and our ability to relate to other people is a universal truth.
Mm-hmm.
Let's just go put ourselves in a new environment, be uncomfortable. Even if that's, let me go sit with some kids. I mentioned my nephew at the top of the call. The things that I learned from him, that the insights fascinate me. They really do. You know, a few weeks ago, I made a post. He got invited to a couple parties, and I said to him, "How'd you get so popular that you're, you know, in two parties in one day? You're wow." And he said, "I love my friends. I be kind to everyone." And that's exactly. And for me, I
Mm-hmm.
thought, wow, so the business and life lesson here is kindness is the thing that's going to open doors. Kindness
Mm-hmm.
is going to get you the invitations. Now, obviously, when I write up the thing, he's not the one coming up with all the language, but that insight is just so simple.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the type of thing that we have to be willing to lean into, putting ourselves in spaces we wouldn't normally be in.
And it's interesting with concepts like that. It's sometimes it's
Mhm.
the simplest answers that can overcome the most complex issues, right? Like
Adults,
listening to
oh,
we
adults have an
overthink
uncanny
everything.
ability to complicate the simple.
Yeah,
We
it's like
do.
there's no way it could be that simple. There's no way. I'm
Right.
gonna go. Yeah, it's absolutely wild. And I loved everything that you just said. And there's something that this is maybe my way of oversimplifying or
Yeah.
simplifying it, which is, and this is what I tell a lot of our clients, even or people that I'm coaching, is you have to be okay with being shitty at stuff. Like we have
Yeah.
this, and I don't know, I can't put my finger on why we have this need to be good at things right away and only do things that we're good at. And if we're not good at it, we're going to hide from it.
Hmm.
If it's social media, like all we see is highlight reels all around
Yeah.
us.
Yeah.
And if we fail, we associate that with consequences, as opposed to if I fail and I don't learn from it and I can't change the outcome,
Hmm.
then that's a failure. But if I fail, I learn from it and then I can change the outcome, I can get a
Hmm.
better outcome. Is it a
Hmm.
failure, or is that just it was just like an expensive lesson, or it doesn't even have to be expensive?
Yeah.
But we have to be okay at being shitty at stuff. So
Yeah.
where do you? I love this leadership angle from
Yeah.
it. When you're working with leaders,
Hmm.
where do you see, again, let's talk to like a newer leader. Where do you
Hmm.
see a newer leader? They're put in the position, or they put themselves in the position, or they're given a
Hmm.
title. Where do
Hmm.
you see the biggest place that they struggle with is for a new leader?
Defining what it is they're going to do and the legacy that they want to create. Right.
Ooh.
That's huge. And a lot
Mm-hmm.
of that comes from I'm stepping into these shoes that someone else filled potentially, or I'm
Mm-hmm.
starting something and I'm created a business in an area that I believe I could do better than what I'm experiencing, or B doesn't exist. So when you have to be the one that is again creating and defining that, a lot of that is unknown. And as humans, we are uncomfortable with the unknown. And from a biological perspective, our brains are wired for efficiency. Our brains are wired for consistency. So when you upset the apple cart now and your brain doesn't have something to default to, right? It's why when you're writing an email, it's very easy to make a mistake with spelling because your brain knows what you're trying to say. So it's not going to
Mm-hmm.
catch that error.
Mm-hmm.
Our brains are wired for that. So we have to work against our brains in that way, right? And force ourselves to get to the point where the thing that's uncomfortable becomes uncomfortable, maybe becomes comfortable. And the other thing that we have to recognize too is, and you mentioned this, failure is an event. It's not a person. And we have a really hard time separating the two.
Mm-hmm.
And what is really failure? We can only define that for ourselves, right? Some people might look at it to say, this didn't go the way I wanted. Here's what I learned and I'm moving on. Other people are going to sit in the church or whatever you want to call it, temple or any other thing of rumination. And because
Mm-hmm.
they're sitting in that space, they're unable to move forward. And really, it just might have been an adjustment or tweak that is needed. But unless you have that experience, you won't know what needs to be adjusted, which means you can't iterate. I don't even know what version of iPhone we are on right now, but it's but it is nowhere close to what the first generation
Yeah.
was, right? And
Mm-hmm.
that's the thing. We are okay to accept it in other spaces, or we have a lot more grace with other people. And
Mm-hmm.
where we really need to start is grace for ourselves.
That's beautifully said. And I want to go back to that first point that you said,
Hmm.
that we kind of elaborated on a little bit, which was like our brains are lazy. They want to
Hmm.
revert to what it knows. Like our subconscious is
Hmm.
kind of our instincts, right?
Hmm.
We download it from our conscious, and then that's kind of how we
Hmm.
react to things. It's like our
Hmm.
natural
Yeah.
cognitive biases, and
Hmm.
you have to fight against that, which is so odd. But that's one amazing thing that separates us from animals, is that we can intentionally take responsibility for those biases that we do have, and we can fight against them.
Hmm.
What would you say is some of the biggest or most prominent of those biases that we carry, especially when we're going into a new leadership role in itself?
Oh goodness, there's so many, right? And I think we all have biases, right? We all carry prejudices, just the way that the world works, is the way that
Hmm.
humans work. We were designed from like that from the conception of time. You know, it was about safety, right? Similar to me, safe, not similar, unsafe, right?
Hmm.
Biologically, we were wired in that way. So that comes up too, right? You know, confirmation bias is something that's going to come up too, right?
Hmm.
Affinity bias. There's so many different types of biases that come up in leadership. And I think it's important to talk about it and for people to create ways to bring awareness to not only what's happening, but to ask others and invite others to let them know as a leader if they are demonstrating that in the moment, right? So there's
Hmm.
too many different types of biases to go through, but they come up in different ways, right?
Hmm.
How might someone perceive? And I just had this conversation with someone last week. We're talking about a leader who's male and what the perception amount has been or the responses around the women on the team and whether or not they want opportunities. And what I said was, yes, that exists in society. The stereotypes, all of those things are true, but women also hold those too. You
Hmm.
cannot be in a society, right? Even when people talk about diversity, and they talk about all the challenges that come along with that, you cannot be in a society that is conditioned and structured a certain way and not believe that you too don't hold some of those beliefs, or you don't
Hmm.
carry that, because you were also conditioned in the same environment. Even if that environment is anti who you are,
Hmm.
an aspect of you carries that because that's what you were conditioned in.
That's so what I'm kind of catching on right now. So there obviously there's you're right. There's a million different types of biases that we
Yeah.
have and we hold, and a lot of them we don't even know because we're not aware of. But I think that's the key is the awareness piece of it. And what I'm catching on to is it's a bias. I think it kind of encompasses many, but it's called the availability bias, which
Mm-hmm.
is it's what information is available, easily
Mm-hmm.
accessible to me, and then that is overweighed by even the evidence that's in front of me. So I think I've been conditioned to know this is how companies should be structured. This is how hierarchy should be
Mm-hmm.
structured. This is how things get done. This is who makes the decisions. This is all this types of stuff. And I know there's an example of sharks. Like
Mm-hmm.
this is a little bit off base, but this is an easy
Yeah.
kind of example. People say, how often, if in your head, how often do people get attacked by sharks? And then immediately
Mm-hmm.
in your head, you're thinking, I mean, in our age, anyways, I'm thinking Jaws. I'm like, oh, it probably happens all the time, right?
Yeah.
I'm picturing like all these movies that are out, and Shark Week and all this kind of stuff. When really, they happen very rarely. But because of that availability bias, that whatever the information that's easily accessible to me is now overweighed
Mm-hmm.
by the true evidence that's in front of me. Right? I think
Yeah. Yeah.
in leadership we just there's so much of that. It's
Mm-hmm.
just what is immediately in my head right now that's going to
Yeah.
overweigh even the most
Yeah.
obvious evidence.
And then where I see that too, since the cognitive biases piece, it's also the anchoring bias, right? It's the
Mm,
first piece of information. That's what I'm going to
hmm.
go with. I'm not going
Yep.
to look at anything else. I'm just ready to move forward. And I often challenge leaders too on, even the authority bias. Just because you're in a leadership role does not mean that you need to try to throw that around because you are limiting yourself
Hmm.
when you're unwilling to look into or be open to the perspectives and the opinions and the insights that others are bringing to the table. And
Hmm.
no one's going to want to work for someone or be around someone that is because I said so.
No, that's the worst type of leader. And I love the anchor. I love that you brought up the anchor bias because the one thing that's great about that is as a leader, you can create new anchors for people. Like
Yes.
that's something that can. I mean, in all the biases, you can kind of work
Hmm.
to your favor, whether that's positive or negative thing. That's up to the person who's utilizing them. But as a leader, like you can create new anchors for people, and then you can now they're that availability bias or that anchor
Hmm.
now could be something positive,
Hmm.
right? If they
Yeah.
come to you
Hmm.
and they have a problem, they're like, hey, I couldn't solve this thing right now, I was having
Hmm.
issues with it. And if you react
Hmm.
in I don't have time for that right now, you're stressed, I don't have time for that right now, just go figure it out, and then
Hmm.
come back to me a little bit
Hmm.
later.
Hmm. And
you're
we can
saying,
teach people how to frame things up, right? Because that stress comes from, I'm making a million decisions and someone is coming to you potentially with what is heavy on their plate. And from the lens that you sit in as a leader, it may not be a big deal to you, right? It
hmm
may not be because you've done it already. And one of the stories I always tell is that when I was in college, I took a stats class, hated it. I think the entire class failed. And it was the first time I ever failed a class because I
yeah,
was always an A student. And I retook it with another teacher and got an A, and a lot of the class did. And speaking to that other professor, one of the things I learned that always stuck with me was this. He said, I've been teaching for over 30 years, but every time I enter the classroom with a new set of students, I remember what it was like on my first day, and that's the place I start. Because he
mm-hmm.
recognized that he had lather, rinse, and repeat for over 30 years. The people entering his classroom didn't have the lather, rinse, and repeat. So they weren't
Mm-hmm.
anywhere close to on the same parallel or path. But that humbled him as a professor. And not only did everyone love him, people actually learned with him. The other professor took a,
So
I've
cool.
been doing this, just here's the, just figure this out type of
Uh-huh.
approach because they were frustrated. For them, it came second nature. And
Mm-hmm.
that's something we have to remember too. What is you want to teach people and empower them to figure out things on their own, but sometimes you have to be willing to lean in and you have to teach them what is the thing that I can help, that I want to lean in with you on, and where's the thing where I know that you know this, but
Mm-hmm.
your anxiety and that internal voice is leading the way.
Yeah. Well, you want to create that anchor for them that if they can't figure something out right now, that it's okay. We'll figure it out together. You can come to
Yeah.
me for help, not
Hmm.
the go figure
Hmm.
it out
Yeah.
yourself. Because then you have to also be aware of now that like you're responsible as a leader, you're
Yeah.
responsible for that person's future in this moment,
Yeah.
right?
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
if you react like that, if you create that anchor for them, you're impeding them developing in
Hmm.
the future too. You have to
Yeah.
take responsibility for that. And there's one thing, there's a lot of points that you're saying that I love, but one is, so we have a few laws of leadership, and a lot of them have to do with communication, and one being, great communication starts with understanding what state they are in and what state you
Hmm.
are in, and
Hmm.
number two is understanding that everybody has a different map, so
Yeah.
everybody sees their certain situations or sees this
Hmm.
situation based on their experiences,
Hmm.
their traumas, their where they grew up. I don't know where that
Hmm.
came from, but their
Celebrate
uh,
it. Celebrate
their own,
it.
yeah, right, yeah, exactly. Everybody should celebrate their own
Yes. Yeah.
histories. But like the idea is, if we're on this podcast
Hmm.
together, Zach and
Hmm.
Charmaine, we're on the same X currently.
Hmm.
We're on the
Hmm.
same X on the map, but how we got to that X is very different. Therefore,
Yes.
how I see information and give
Hmm.
information and take in information is going to be different than you
Hmm.
because we have a different
Hmm.
map. So
Hmm.
you have to be very hyper aware of that, and that was a great
Hmm.
example, I think, of that.
Yeah. Thank you. And everyone has, the other thing that we sometimes don't recognize, and I brought up earlier, is the intersectional identities. How does culture and the way that you were raised shape and
Yep.
influence that, right? So that's another big thing. What are those factors that are at play? How is somebody interpreting what is or isn't happening
Mm-hmm.
in that moment, right? So I'll use myself as an example. And I had this conversation with a friend that lives and born and raised in South Africa. You know, we had a conversation around like me saying, hey, I don't think this much, right? In terms of, are you okay? Like, is something wrong? Like, I'm fine. Like, but culturally, she was raised that people may not be upfront with how they really feel. So you are
Mm-hmm.
overly catering to someone to really make sure that they feel comfortable because maybe they're not going to say to you. And the conversation we had was, because that's the lens you're coming from, there are a lot of assumptions that you may be making about how I'm feeling or not feeling in this moment. When the reality is, I'm telling you exactly what it is. And if I
Mm-hmm.
have a problem, I will let you know that. Right. And that took, even for me, work and years to get to, but recognizing that and being willing to have the conversation. A lot of the times we're unwilling to lean into a conversation because our attitudes are, somebody should know. How?
Mm-hmm.
How? You know, a lot of cultures, people give the thumbs up sign and that means something positive. Well, there's some cultures around the world where that is a curse, right? And these are the things that we
Right.
don't, right, we don't recognize. Or if we think about, some Asian cultures, age differential is so important, right? I worked for a Japanese company for a really long time and learned so much, right? But how do those interactions and what were the expectations? If we're not willing to say that up front, we're going to be disappointed. The cultural intelligence point has to be a part of it. We have to find out from people, what did you mean by that? When this happens, how did you interpret that? We don't do that. We just assume they should know.
Mm-hmm.
And people don't know. I have an identical twin sister, and I tell people all the time, we were in our mother's womb together, and we don't always get it right
Mm-hmm.
in terms of communication. So if we don't always get it right, then
Yeah.
that really means that the rest of us in the world really need to work harder at that, because there shouldn't be the assumption, because we've had different life experiences. We've separated at different points. And as a result of that, even if we are watching the same movie at the same time, we may not have the same take on it. She loves all Twilight stuff and Harry Potter. I don't get it. I don't. I think, White Castle and Napoleon Dynamite are amongst the funniest movies. And she's like, what is wrong with you? Right? So, and we're twins. So we really have to lean into trying to figure out what's happening in that moment. So even for that person that's coming for help, as a leader, working to understand, not just answering their immediate question, but digging a little bit to understand, where might the block be, right? Is
Mm-hmm.
this, or have they been raised in a culture where positional power or deference is so strong that even if they identified something was wrong because it was another leader who made a mistake, they're afraid to say that, right?
Mm-hmm.
These are the types of things we have to dig into if we really want to move forward.
This is so good. Well, it also, because it's just so relatable. Because so we have one of our other laws is, law number one is that understanding that great communication and leadership is not about you; it's about them and the outcome.
Yeah.
So we have to be. We're not just communicating so that we feel like it made sense, because we run
Yeah.
into that a lot with leaders. Like I say it over and over again. We have this initiative, and I tell them what to
Mm-hmm.
do, and I make sure that they're clear on how to do it, and then they go and they fail, right? And then they
Mm-hmm.
just blame it on them. They don't look at themselves like, okay,
Mm-hmm.
did I communicate it properly
Mm-hmm.
enough? Did I communicate for them and not for me? Did I make
Mm-hmm.
sure that they understood it? Did I have them
Mm-hmm.
communicate it back to me so that I knew that we were on the same page and that we were going to
Mm-hmm.
go achieve these great things together? How do you, 'cause that's a lot, that's hard to do, especially these days when there's so many, which is an amazing thing. And I love
Mm-hmm.
a lot of the direction that we're going with, where people from all over the world can work together for these common causes.
Mm-hmm.
But as the leader,
Mm-hmm.
how do you learn how to communicate to so many different maps, so to speak, especially in short periods of time? Like, well,
Mm-hmm.
what are some tips, or what would be like the first thing that you would do if you're a leader with a very
Mm-hmm.
diverse team? You're talking to a lot of different maps, to understand how to communicate effectively, or to even get the feedback that you are
Mm-hmm.
communicating effectively.
Modeling. I always tell people this. So when I start working with someone, or introduce myself to someone, and we're getting to know each other, one of
Mm-hmm.
the things I like to do is not only introduce my name, but let them know, hey, here's my working style. What you will notice is X, Y, and Z. And when I'm working with someone, and I also taught my teams to do this, it might look like, hey, Zach, I am a processor. In a meeting, especially when I'm just starting to get information, I may be very silent in the beginning of the meeting because I absorb information. And as I'm absorbing information, it may mean that I may not have anything to contribute. It doesn't mean I'm not present. It's just the way I process. What you will notice as I get more up to speed is that I will start to contribute more. That, if I am starting to shut down or disconnect, here's what you may notice. Here's how to bring that to my attention. And then I put it back on the person to say, what do I need to know about your working style? What do I need to know about if you start to shut down? What might you start to do? What might I be able to do in that moment to bring it to your attention? And what's the best way to move forward? Some people may say to you, thank you for bringing it to my attention by doing this, but that means I need a minute to process, so we'll have to pick it
Mm-hmm.
up the next day. Other people might say, point it out then and let's hash it out. But if you don't have that conversation, we as people are, again, our brains, we're going to default to our patterns, which mean the
Mm-hmm.
pattern that I'm comfortable with for myself is what I'm going to default to and may expect of the other person. And that's just not a one-time conversation. As we grow and evolve, anyone that's ever reported to me, I still talk to them. We still text, we still talk. And that's one of the things they always tell me, that they now do this too. And
Mm-hmm.
even as we work together, we revisited that. Is this still true today? Because now we've gotten to know each other better. What do we need to reestablish? And I think sometimes if we're willing to have that conversation or establish it, we just think it's a one and done. That's not the thing. If I go to the gym today and pump some weight, that is not going to get me the results and the Michelle Obama arms that I want, right? Like, it's not going to be one time thing, right? So we have to be open to the return and learn model, even with other people.
Well, and if you're an effective leader, you're developing people, therefore they shouldn't be the same person
Mhm.
6 months or
Yeah.
a year down the road. So you will have to constantly
Yeah.
revisit that. And it'd be
And neither
naive
should
to
you be as
think
a leader. You as a
exactly.
leader shouldn't be the same person either as you're getting, and because you should be growing and learning because of what you're doing and the people you're surrounded with too.
No, I mean, absolutely. And then ideally, if you're a good leader, you're also a good follower or you're a good coachee
Hmm.
yourself.
Hmm.
And you're doing that with
Hmm.
your
Hmm.
leader or with your group
Yeah.
or whatever it
Yeah.
is with you. This is amazing. What would your, how can I ask this question? So if you're, so obviously you're setting those expectations at the
Hmm.
beginning. Okay,
Hmm.
this is how I like to learn, or this is how I communicate. This is what you could notice from me.
Hmm.
What can I notice from you? What's next? How do you keep that consistent as a leader? Obviously there's always coming
Hmm.
back and learning and that kind of thing, but so many people, again, they see early success and then
Hmm.
they just get comfortable with it. What has worked for you, maybe, to
Yeah.
constantly remind yourself to grow and to set up processes and systems so that you do continue to grow? Because I know life can get busy,
Yeah. Yeah.
right?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I mean, growth comes in a variety of different ways, right?
Hmm.
So, what is the way that we resonate or the thing that brings us back to center? So, when I'm really stressed out, I know I have to come back to center. For me, that's being in around a body of water. It doesn't mean I have to be in the water, though that would be the preference, but just looking at water. It could also be for me immersing myself in some type of cultural or art activity because that's my center, right? I might just go to the museum and spend hours. I just want to go by myself. And then that's my oxygen, right? That's
Hmm.
how I recenter. So I think we all have to identify what's that for us. And sometimes I've heard people say, well, I can't do the thing that I want to do. Well, guess what? If I can't get to a beach or a body of water, I have videos of my on my phone of oceans or sounds that I've recorded, and I will watch that video, right? So we have to stop
Hmm.
automatically going to the default excuse of, well, I can't. I have pictures I've taken of images at museums and things that have moved me, and I have a folder on my phone. So if I can't physically get there, I go back and look at it. It might be listening to an app that's playing that music of the ocean. Whatever that thing is, your body will recognize the activity, whether it's doing exactly what you want to do or something adjacent as its way of comment. And that's something that we have to lean into. And then let other people create that for themselves too and be open to that. It's going to look different, right? For some people, that
Hmm.
might be cooking up a storm in the kitchen. For me, I'm like, dear God, no. I can cook. I don't enjoy it the way that some people do, right? Whatever that thing is, I think the first step is how do you come back to center? And then when you come back to center, you're in a much different space to learn and grow. And I always find that for me, even when I immerse myself in those activities or read a book, or sometimes it's just talking to my nephew, honestly, because he just tells me the
Cute.
wildest things, you know, it forces your brain to engage in a different way, which means
Mm.
that learning is happening a different way. We have to get away from the thought that learning means I've watched a documentary, learning means I've read some leadership book, we have to get away from that. There's so many different
Hmm.
ways that we can learn and our minds can be expanded. And beyond the traditional is where I think the opportunity for the most rapid expansion will come.
That's amazing advice, and it's kind of a common theme, which is know thyself. Like you
Hmm.
have to know what your center is.
Hmm.
How do you, and back to your previous point, even understanding how you like to learn and recognizing, how am I physically? Because I mean, most of our communications, body language,
Hmm.
like understanding how I communicate, and then how can I, communicate that to other people to be like, okay, when I'm in a meeting, I tend to look like this or whatever it is. That
Hmm.
just means that I'm taking in information. I'm going to
Hmm.
engage later on. So
Hmm.
you really have to know yourself and understand your
Yeah.
understanding yourself. That's
And ask people questions to seek clarity. That's another big thing. We make so many assumptions, and those assumptions really derail relationships. Assumptions can undermine a relationship that is forming and one that has been formed already. And we do it too often. And we have to challenge our own assumptions. And one of the stories I tell is There was a leader that I was working with at an organization, and we were in a meeting, and it was all the executive leaders. And they were presenting something, and the CEO at the time was rubbing their eyes. And this leader interpreted that was presented as, oh, they're upset, they're bored, and they were pissed for days. And when they came to me, I said, so you have this entire narrative, wilder than any Disney story, about what's happened. Have you considered just asking them how they felt about the presentation? Because you've run with this wild narrative. Well, turns out the CEO had just had their eyes dilated a couple hours before, right? So the rubbing the eyes had nothing to do with they were in physical distress.
Yeah.
And for over a week, the person who presented was just, for lack of better terms, in their feelings. Now, I knew what had happened, but I was trying to prove a point to them. You've caused yourself misery and then created an entire narrative because you refused to ask a question and instead decided to default to assumption.
Isn't it amazing what our brains will do? Just immediately.
Absolutely.
The worst possible Pixar movie will create in our head over something, or somebody's eyes getting dilated.
I got a text last week from someone, or a voice note, that said that I'm upset with them because they sent me a text in January and I didn't respond to it. In my head, I'm like, what? I didn't even see the text. But again, it's whatever space that person is coming from. So we have to be the people that are challenging our assumptions first and foremost. And you mentioned body language. And this is another thing I tell people, and I really lean in heavily on this for cultural context. We believe that we are interpreting someone's body language correctly, but we have to remember it's through our own framing. And what we are interpreting may not be what they're intended to communicate, because cultural differences, personal preferences, personal expression doesn't always translate. So I am not a subscriber of body language gives off everything, because just like the example I just gave, that leader completely misread the other executive's body language and made it all about them when it had nothing to do with them.
No, absolutely. And then as the leader, being aware of that.
Yeah.
Being aware of your body language, because you wanted them. I mean, unless your eyes get dilated and you're in physical distress, that's a different story, right? But if somebody's giving a presentation and you know that they're nervous and it's important to them, be aware of how you're presenting yourself too, right?
And as I told that leader who was rubbing their eyes, if they felt comfortable, because I don't think we have to share everything about ourselves in the meeting before it started, just sharing like, hey, I just came from a medical appointment, I'm not feeling my best, would have set the tone.
Exactly. It would have been completely comfortable. It's so funny. Like it's funny that the difference between our stressed, like when we are stressed, how we cognitively function, than when we're creative. And that's actually a great point to you, finding your center, the water, the creativity, the art, the museums, that puts you in a space of creativity, because the stress is further away now. Because when we're stressed, like our brain, like we keep kind of coming back to, like, our brains are fascinating organs, but they're also very lazy, and we're not that far off from, like, we were evolutionarily, like, we weren't that smart not that long ago, so our brains are fairly primal in a lot of ways. So we see the way we respond to stress, right? Our brains can't really tell the difference between, okay, I'm running away from a predator, or I'm stressed because we're about to miss a deadline. Like our response, so we're so used to, in that state, we're more likely to make shorter, more reactive, less creative decisions. So it's fascinating. But I have a question for you. I have a few questions for you before we end off here. So one is, you're speaking to a brand new leader, or maybe a founder of a company, who they don't necessarily identify themselves yet as a leader, but they're in that leadership position. They took responsibility to get an outcome. What would be your advice to them? They want to be a better leader. They want to be able to grow a team. They want to be able to achieve amazing things. Where do they start? What's the first thing they should go do? They should watch the rest of the podcast, and then what should they go do?
I love this. I actually made a post about this on Monday. Leadership starts with self. Right? You cannot manage others effectively if you don't manage yourself. And to manage yourself effectively, you have to be self-aware.
Preach. I love it.
That's what I posted. That's the answer.
I love it. Well, and it goes back to simplicity, right? Yeah. They think like, oh, I have to go do this, and I have to read these 13 books, and then I have to create my own core. Just focus on yourself.
Yeah.
I
There's
love it.
so many books out there, and and there's some people that I know and I love them dearly. It's like, oh, this leadership book came out. It's all around basically the same type of stuff. Even
Hmm.
when, I'm certified in different, personality assessments, but I tell people all the time, I've done a majority of them, haven't tested them out in HR. They're pretty much all the same. They just might be
Mm.
presenting that information differently, but I can lay them all over. You tell me, well, I'm this style, or in one assessment, I can tell you what that's going to translate to another one, right? Because we're wired in certain ways, right? And no one person is the same, but we have certain tendencies just because of how we're wired. So we have to
Hmm.
be willing to be open to that too, and just recognize all the things that we are driving ourselves nuts about. And I need to get all this extra information. All you need and all you want, you already have. You have the tools, you have the skills to move forward. Trust that. Everything you need to be an effective leader, you have awareness of. Somebody has said it. And we are all leaders. Every single one of us is a leader. So when people, to me, leader is not a title that someone else has given you. It's a title you decide that you're going to own. Am I leading myself effectively? How am I treating my, we are, if you own a home, you're leading and managing that. You're leading and managing paying the bills. If you're a parent, you're leading and managing your household and doing that. Even if you're not a parent, if you have pets, plants, you are leading and managing, taking care of things. And we all are. I even tell students this. You are leading and managing yourself to get yourselves to school. Sit down and pay attention. Take those exams. Study. That's leadership. It's all about moving forward in a direction that is going to ultimately benefit you and others. So you have to decide for that title or not
I
that
love it.
someone else gave you. Own your own leadership and then work to
Hmm.
identify the areas that you believe you may need to excel in and celebrate the ones that you already do. And if we are, and I have told many people this, not just leaders, this pressure we put on ourselves. If someone is an 8 in an area at a scale of 10, them developing to become a 10 is quite easy. But if they're at a level 2, they're never going to be a 10.
Hmm.
So maybe the work will get them to a 4 or 5, and then can we accept that? If it's you don't have to do everything as a leader. You may just have to have functional awareness. I
Hmm.
One of my friends will kill me for saying this, and I love you, Rox. I'm sorry. I do not like benefits in terms of, it's the thing. If you said to me on the HR totem pole, where is it? I will tell you it is so far down on the pole it doesn't even register. But I have awareness of it, understand how it integrates in a larger people strategy. But I will not be the person that does it. I have a friend who's a benefits attorney. I'm like, why did you do this to yourself? Why? Right? They love it. I don't. I don't have to become a 10 in that. What I need to
Hmm.
understand is, how do I get myself, if I'm a 2 to a 4, to more be able to more speak to it functionally? And more importantly, how do I wise up to get the right people around me who excel in this and let
Mm.
them own it?
I understand what you're getting at now. Okay. So you don't need to be a 10 in everything, but you do need to be able to surround yourself with 10s and lead them in the same direction.
Or an 8. They can get it
Or an
done
8.
way better than you, right? Right.
Yeah. Got it. Or an 8, and you work to develop them to a
Yeah.
9 or a 10, right? That's
Right.
absolutely amazing advice. That was a big, I don't even want to say anything else. That was an
Hmm.
amazing sentiment and a mic drop moment, I think the kids say these days. So I got a last
Yeah.
question. Well, there are really one and a half questions for you,
Yes.
Charmaine.
Yeah,
But
sure, sure, sure.
what would be the next summit that you are chasing? What's the next big thing that you want to accomplish?
Yeah, so right now, what I'm really working on, and I think the universe keeps confirming this for me, is expanding on the B2C side of the business and really around. I've had people reaching out to me to say things like, I don't trust the HR at my company, or I don't know if this is what's happening in the workplace is something that it should be happening. It doesn't feel right. Can I have a consult? And really what I want to do is I want to be the person that people are talking to before they ever need an employment attorney, right?
Ooh.
And that's the summit I'm chasing. Establishing myself and creating that so that people have that outlet. And a lot of that also comes from, there's so many times in my corporate experience where I knew maybe the company was not right, but I can't tell the person, oh, you can sue us and win. I can't say that. So now having my own consultancy, being in a position where I can help people understand the dynamics that may be happening and how they navigate that. Let me show you how to set up this chessboard. That is the thing that really is giving me joy. And that's the summit of chasing, establishing myself as that person.
And I have absolutely no doubt that you're going to do that from this conversation and our previous conversation. Where can people find you if they want to support you in this, or if they want to see how they could work with you possibly? Where could
Yeah.
they find you? Where can they?
Yeah.
What other information do you
So
have out there?
of course, of course, of course. So Charmaine Green-Forde on LinkedIn. There's no other. The other only other Green-Forde is my twin sister, but you can follow her too. And if you follow her, you'll connect with me. And my email info@chapter2.com. And chapter, just like a book, 2 is TOO.com. And just shoot an email. But website chapter2.com or info@chapter2.com, and we can connect.
Beautiful. And obviously, we are going to link all of that down below.
Yeah.
We are big advocates for everything that you're doing, Charmaine, and we
Thank you.
absolutely love. This is one of my the most off base maybe compliments I give people, but I am extremely happy, glad, and honored that you exist and that you were even come on our
Oh,
show. It
thank
is
you.
again, we need more people like you out there.
Thank you. And I
So
love the work that you're doing too, and the people that you're highlighting. And, listen to the podcast, watch the YouTubes. I love the work. And, when you are on all of the shows, you know, and everyone's chasing you down even more, I'm just know I'm celebrating everything that you're doing.
I that means a lot. That absolutely means a lot coming from you, Charmaine. But I know for a fact all of you got a lot out of this. Your notebooks are full. I hope you enjoyed your snacks as well. Charmaine,
Yeah.
you'll know what I mean by that if you watch
Yeah.
some of the beginning of our
Yes.
podcast. But everybody, take what Charmaine said. Take it to heart. Go focus on yourselves. Fill your own cups.
Hmm.
And never stop learning. Intentionally take responsibility for you as a leader, what you took on, for the people around you, the outcomes that you're trying to create. Continue to improve, continue to develop people, and continue to care about people. But until next time, everybody, keep chasing your next summit.